Everyone knows what happens on Friday. We go inside EMS. I am your host, Chris Cebollero, and with me always is the one they call Kelly Grayson. Kelly Grayson, KG. Friday, another episode. We are
Yeah,
coming to the end of June. End of June.
that's. I think back to our first episodes, and that
Hang on a
was 10
second.
plus years ago.
Hang on a second. Hang on a second. You got to come in a lot quicker. I don't know what that pause was. What are you thinking there, man?
I'm
I
thinking,
mean,
well,
you're
actually,
not
I was June has been an eventful month for me, and not in a good way. So I was probably thinking about that.
because you got to jump in there. Come on, you got to be right on those
Yeah,
things.
I got to be a
Try
little
that
quick.
again. Let's try that again. Everybody knows what happens on Friday. Kelly Grayson, the one we call Kelly Grayson, Kelly Grayson. What's going on? Hey, Kelly, can you believe that it's almost the end of June already?
Yeah, my how time flies.
Better,
I can't believe we're in the
better.
beginning of summer.
You
Feels
know,
good up here in the North Country
I
compared
bet
to
it is,
June in
man.
South Louisiana.
I think we throw out a shout out. You and I are going to be probably doing a show live
Yep.
the middle of July in Durant, Oklahoma, the Choctaw EMS conference there in Durant, Oklahoma. It's the Murderer's Row of speakers. If you're in that area, check
Yeah.
that out. We have world-class speakers coming to that event and Kelly Grayson. But good speakers. I mean, Dr.
Yeah.
Brian Bledsoe is going to be there. Ken Bouvier is going to be there.
Yeah.
Kelly Grayson, Chris Cebollero, John Purrier, Chris Elite. Is that how you say his name?
Bright. Yeah.
Ebright. I never say his name right. Chris Ebright. We had the opportunity to be there last year, Kelly. It was a great show. We're going to probably do a show live like we did last year from the conference. But if you're in the area, I think this is going to be a great regional conference. Come by, check it out. We got a lot of great stuff going on. But one of the things that we were going to talk about today is I was going to actually take you through one of my classes, Kelly. And I think it has a really great ring to it. And that's what kind of got me talking about the conference. But then I had the opportunity to chat with Pierre, and he was like, "Man, I've got a lot of conflict going on here in my organization, and it's sometimes I got to stand up and be a leader, and I want to be able to deal with conflict without crushing morale, right?" And when we
Yeah.
think about what we're going to talk about today, EMS leaders will face conflict. And some of the things that we have to be able to do is ensure that we still stay motivated, we still stay. I'll get it out, man. I promise I'll get it out.
You having a stroke, man?
I am. I mean, how's my face look? We still, don't answer that question. Don't answer that question. But we have to be able to stay inspired and we have to be able to continue to inspire people. So let's go ahead and jump into that. And we'll talk about what conflict is and how to manage conflict. What do you think, Kelly?
Yeah, that's the unglamorous part of being a supervisor, being an operations manager is managing the inevitable conflict that happens among your crews. And what's the saying that a good compromise is a solution that both sides hate equally, and it's that kind of thing. It's whether it's a disagreement, an attitude problem, or an issue that's escalated way too far. Conflict is part of EMS. You cannot avoid it. It becomes a little more dicey to deal with when it's more than just a couple of people on your shift. The trick isn't avoiding conflict, it's learning how to handle it without crushing morale, without leaving the other side or one or both sides feeling that you're showing favorites or you're blind to their concerns. So it's a delicate road to tread.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to break down tactical empathy. So now, as we start to think about taking empathy to a different level, what is it? Why does it matter? How will it help you through conflict and without being passive or it turning into a steamroller? Yeah, I used to do a podcast, and I had a clinical psychologist on, and where we talked about passive aggressive behavior. And she goes, Let's set the record straight here. There's no such thing as passive aggressive. Passive aggressive is aggressive. And we shouldn't be able to think about that. But I'm very excited to talk about it, Kelly. So why don't you go ahead and set it up?
Yeah, I love the term tactical empathy. I mean, well put, because if you want EMTs to pay attention to it, just call it tactical, but
Throw
it's
a tactical in front of it.
yeah, tactical empathy isn't about being nice. It's about being intentional. It's the ability to recognize someone's emotions, and even if you don't agree with them, respond in a way that keeps things moving forward.
No,
And you know, recognizing and respecting someone else's feelings while still trying to come up with a conflict resolution is the key there.
yeah, and I think that one of the things that we were talking about, I was talking about this morning, I was teaching a little class, and we were talking about good conflict resolution. And when you have a high degree of conflict resolution, it's being able to offset the conflict before it even starts. And one of the ways that you do that is you have to be able to know your people, right? So if
Yeah,
you come in and you're having a bad day, Kelly, and it looks like someone, just kind of flipped over your cornflakes, I should be able to tell that in you that something's
yeah,
off and something's different. When we talk about tactical empathy, this is used in hostage negotiations. It's business executives use it. And believe it or not, EMS leaders need to be able to learn tactical empathy and what lets you sit in the room with someone who's upset, who's defensive, who's straight up angry, and still have a productive outcome. One of the things that I've always tried to do in those situations, Kelly, is I want those people to thank me when they walk out of the room. They want to thank me for caring about them, thank me for giving them advice, and thank me for trying to talk them off the ledge.
yeah. You know, all too often EMS leaders skip that part entirely. Most of my experience with leaders doing conflict resolution is, oh, all right, let's do this so that I can get you people out of my hair because I got better things to do. And that's not the way. That's not the way to put out the fire. We react, we get defensive, we go straight into solution mode without listening. And if you don't listen, and this has not been my talent. I'm a pragmatic, practical person. I go into solution mode. But if there's one thing that Nancy McGee has taught me is to
How to
listen.
dress? How to dress?
No, not just how to
Oh,
dress, but she dresses me pretty well,
how,
but how to listen,
yeah.
because it's often been 2 hours into an argument before I realize what it's actually about because I didn't listen. And that is how good employees become disengaged and bad situations get worse because you're not listening, and you're not listening with some empathy and understanding. You're just listening to respond.
Exactly.
And if you're not listening to understand, then that comes off in your solution, and it just leaves everyone with a bad taste in their mouths.
No, yeah. And you got to remember, Kelly, a couple shows back, we talked about taking criticism.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need to take criticism. And let's give you an example. So let's say that I'm a supervisor and you're in the field and I pull up to you and you're late again, right? You're showing up late for your shift. And as a supervisor, I walk up to you and say, you got to fix this or there's going to be consequences. How is the employee going to react to it? How would you react, Kelly? You're going to immediately shut down. You're going to feel attacked. And then they bring up staffing shortages, back-to-back calls, poor communication. And
Yeah.
now it's the blame game, right? And now we've
Yep.
got to be able to offset that. We've just went ahead and pushed somebody over the edge who is really frustrated with their job, who's really frustrated with things that are going on at home, who's really frustrated with stress. And we just went ahead and threw gasoline on a fire. And now we've got to be able to figure out a way to put that fire out.
Yep. Yep. And that crew would be like, oh, yeah, listen to Mr. UHU and Time on Task, who hadn't been on a truck in 15 years, telling me how to do things. He has no idea how hard we work, so on and so forth. Yeah, it gets ugly quick. And the conflict doesn't get resolved. It gets pushed off down the road where it builds into something nastier. Now, imagine this same conversation if the supervisor starts with this. Hey, man, I've noticed you had a few late shift handoffs. I'm not here to nail you to the wall. I want to understand what's going on. Can we talk about it? Now, that's an opening for the crew to vent or give their concerns or tell their part of the story. And that's an important part you have to listen to if you're going to get to the root of what the problem is.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, more importantly, even than that, it's really that you're showing that you care about them.
Yeah.
And you said it in your thing. I'm not here to nail you to the wall. I just want to understand it. How can I help? You said it a little bit earlier where you talk about you try to find a solution. We're not listening to listen. We're listening to find a solution, right?
Yeah.
And now what we did is we kind of opened up that door. It's this tactical empathy. And when we talk about tactical, what does that mean? It means being strategic. It means being scientific. It means being, taking strategy and turning it into operate. When does strategy become tactics, right?
Yeah.
So that's tactical empathy in action. You're not saying lateness is okay. You're saying we're willing to listen first. It lowers the defenses, it builds trust. And you know what? Even when, even when they're thinking about it, the outcome still requires accountability. It doesn't require accountability from me. I'm not going to fix the problem for you, but instead I'm saying you may have a problem. How can I help you? But in the end, it's your responsibility on how to do that. So, Kelly, there is 5 tools of how to lead with tactical empathy. And I'm going to kind of ask you to kind of break these down.
Yeah.
So, what is tip number 1, tool number 1?
Label the emotion. Got to understand, it's you might start with say, sounds like you're frustrated, or I can hear the situation been weighing on you. You're not validating the behavior, but you're acknowledging the emotion, and that's important to let the crews or whoever's in the conflict know that you're invested and you're listening.
Yeah. One of the things too to think about is this is where self-awareness comes in. And not only I think self-awareness is the most important characteristic that a leader needs to have, you need to be able to understand yourself, to know when you're put in different situations and know that the emotion has an understanding. Why do I feel this way? But more importantly, as a leader, if you believe that self-awareness is important, we need to be teaching that to our workforce as well. So when you talk about label the emotion, this really comes down to the fact of saying, I could tell you're upset. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Because until you're able to label it, until you're able to understand it, you're not able to develop a plan to fix it. Tool number 2, Kelly, it's use mirroring. What,
Yeah.
what does that what does that mean? Tell the listeners.
Well, first of all, it's active listening. Repeat the last 2, 3 words they say in a calm tone. If someone says, no one ever listens, you say no one ever listens. It buys some time, shows them that you're engaged, and often leads them to open up more. If it sounds like that these things that we talk about are the very same elements of therapeutic communication that they taught us in paramedic school, it's true, they are. The problem is we often don't use those therapeutic communication techniques to talk to each other. And, letting the other party know that you are listening and engaged is tantamount to good conflict resolution.
Agreed. And I do want to add a component here because I got busted on this one time, and you have to continually keep eye contact. Now, I was talking to somebody one time, and I was looking at them in the face, and I was trying to make eye contact, and this person was always looking around, and they looked out the window, and then I looked out the window to see what they were looking at, and he turned his head and he looked at me and said, "You're not even listening to me." And so always keep that eye contact, even if they look away, continue to, look to where their eyes would be when they turn back, because that could look like you don't really care what they're saying. Number 3, Kelly, ask, then listen without interruption. What does that mean?
This is my Achilles heel. I have a hard time shutting up and listening. And oddly enough, I also hate being interrupted. So number 1 is, we start with help me understand, and then just shut up and listen. Listen to them.
Yeah.
Maintain eye contact, nod, so on and so forth. Once people know that you're listening, they're much more likely to hear you. They're much more likely to open up and expand on whatever is going on with them. So
Yeah.
it's important, but as what our parents teach us, how you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them accordingly.
Yeah, no, my parents never talked to me that way.
Well, yeah, of course you're Italian. They didn't do it with the.
You're interrupting me. Stop it. You're interrupting me. But one of the things that I want to add here as well, and I've been saying this for a long time, they used to tell us that we need to listen to what our employees are saying. And one of the things that I've been teaching throughout my leadership career is stop listening to what employees are saying and instead start listening to what employees are feeling. If you can feel their emotions, if you can hear their emotions, you'll understand their words. And I think that when you take that approach, rather than listening to words, you're trying to understand their feelings. And what is this really coming down to? So when you're asking the question, help me understand and then be quiet, you want to be able to hear their emotion, right? So they may not be upset about something. It may be humorous to them, or it may be, but we don't know that because we're not listening to the nonverbal communication. And listen to the emotion, watch the nonverbal communication, and then try to piece together what the words are. Because there are a lot of times, Kelly, that people just don't know how to articulate. They don't know how to tell us what's really going on. And that's one of the reasons that people will be frustrated. So, but this goes to something that you said earlier. Number four is don't jump to the fix, man. Let things kind of work out. Maybe they could work it out. They just need someone to listen to you. But number four, tell us about don't jump into the fix.
You know what, and this is hard for us because we're all a bunch of type A personalities that love to get in and do things, and we're pragmatic, we're practical problem solvers, and I don't think we'd be good paramedics and EMTs if we didn't think that our solution to a problem is the best one. You got to resist that urge. You got to resist the urge to get in there and offer a solution. Empathy is not a rescue mission; it's a recognition moment. Somebody just saying, that makes sense given what you're dealing with is enough to shift the tone of the conversation. And I'll point this out as well. When people come to you with a gripe, generally they have a proposed solution as well, and it may be better than the one you propose. So if you're listening to that and don't jump in to try to fix it, you may actually come up with a better solution to the problem than you had in mind in the first place.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. And one of the things is sometimes as a leader, though, those solutions that people come with are just not realistic.
Yeah.
And now you've got to be able to let them know that there's no way to work that out based on, and this is where transparency comes in. Budget is really an issue. We don't really have the funding for that. One of the things that we got to think about is additional training. But you've got to now be able to figure out a way as someone's coming to you with a solution to fix that if it's not business, if it doesn't make good business sense, you got to figure out a way to let it down. And maybe you get them to be part of the fix. It just may not be with their solution.
Yeah.
Number five is something that I have always had trouble with, that I had to learn how to do this. You have to
Yeah.
deliver hard truth softly. Go ahead
Yeah.
and give us your opinion about this, and then I want to share a little bit about my experience.
Well, empathy doesn't mean avoiding accountability. You can say, I hear where you're coming from, but you also have to draw a line. This behavior will not continue. How do we fix this? That's balanced. It earns extra respect, but accountability, here's a jarring thought to some would-be leaders, is the people you supervise actually do want accountability. They want to be held accountable for
Yeah.
their actions.
Yeah.
That's the structure and the framework for how to work, how to be efficient and to thrive in that environment. And without that accountability, they're kind of lost and rudderless. So you have to acknowledge their feelings, but you also have to provide demand some accountability that this behavior cannot continue, or we need to fix this now.
Yeah, and I think that my mistakes and failure in this area was I was brutal when it came to hard truths. And I had to learn how to be able to communicate these things with a little bit more tact, a little bit more professionalism, a little bit more empathy, a little bit more care. I mean, people don't know how to deal with problems. It's funny. I used to say this all the time, Kelly, that when I was a paramedic, I knew what it was like not to have the equipment to do my job. I knew what it was like not to have my ideas listened to. I knew what it was like to live paycheck to paycheck. I knew what it was like wanting to stab my partner in the eye with a pencil. And that was back in the old pencil days when we used to
I know
carry.
that feeling.
Yeah, yeah. But you know what? What I realized when I became a chief was people are still talking about their partners. They're still living paycheck to paycheck. They still are having trouble with, and it hasn't changed,
Yeah.
right? So it's still the same things that people are having a challenge with. So I had to be able to change my focus because at the time I didn't know how to deal with those things. Now, just
Yeah.
because I've developed the skills on how to deal with those things doesn't mean that the person that's having the problem has developed the skills on how to deal with
Yeah.
those things. And your job as a leader is now to be able to help them to develop the skills necessary to allow them to make those challenges strengths for them. And let's be honest, man, sometimes empathy doesn't fix it, Kelly.
Nope.
You've tried to listen, you've tried to stay calm, and the person is still defensive or defiant. How are you going to deal with that?
Well, we've all run into those. Some people are so crispy that, like they said and cool hand Luke, some men just can't be reached. That's when you got to shift to boundary setting. You are the operations manager. You are the supervisor. They are your subordinates, and you have to remind them of that. Tactical empathy isn't weakness. It's actually strength, and a position of strength that you can lead from. But it has to be followed with clarity. So you say, look, I've given you space and I've listened to you, listen to your side. Now here's what's going to happen next. You have to set those boundaries. And that reminds them again that, we didn't come into this just to gripe and not to come up with a solution. If you're not going to be part of the solution, then I'm going to provide it, and you're going to have to deal with that.
And I think what it all comes down to is that EMS is hard enough. Our job is hard.
Yeah.
You deal with the stress and you deal with the low pay and you deal with the attitudes of people. You deal with what's going on that could be the worst day of somebody's life. We don't need more leadership driven by ego. We don't need any more leadership driven by control. We don't need any more leadership. And really, it's not leadership driven by fear. Tactical empathy is the tool that builds respect and not resentment, Kelly Grayson.
Exactly. You don't lose your authority by listening. You earn authority. When people feel seen, they're more likely to respond. Whether it's a tough feedback session, scheduling time, just a hard day on the truck, whatever it is. This goes back to something I wrote in one of my columns some time back on responsibility upward. What they say, leaders eat last, and that sort of thing. You earn their respect by showing the demonstrating time in and time again that you are looking out for their needs as best you can.
Yeah, I like that, Kelly. And I think if I'm going to throw out something as my final thought, so every supervisor out there, field training officer, leader, if you're listening to this show, don't wait for HR to teach this. Start practicing it today. What is it going to take you? You've got to be able to figure out what your style is, what your process is, and if you're able to meet all of these things that we're talking about today. We gave you the 5 tools. Start with the next conflict and how you're going to address it. And you may even say, look, maybe I wasn't handling conflict the best. I'm going to try something different and let's see if we can find a solution together and lead in a way that holds the line and lifts the people. Kelly Grayson, give us your final thought and let's go.
Agreed. That's what we have for today's episode. If this kind of thing hits home to you, share it with your team. And if you've had a situation where tactical empathy changed the game, send it to us because we'd love to hear about it. We'd love to feature it in a future episode. And for myself and co-host Chris Cebollero, thanks for tuning in to Inside EMS. We're going to catch you guys next week.